Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome back to the Legal Cheek podcast. My name's Tom. I'm one of the directors at Legal Cheek, and I'm joined by Julia, one of our editors. How are you doing, Julia?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Enjoying the sunshine.
Yes, very, very warm. I just had thunderstorms, so fortunately they've just passed and we're ready for the podcast. And it's actually quite a topical theme that we're going to be discussing because many of you tuned in will be gearing up for summer vac schemes, where summer vac scheme season is upon us. And if you've been lucky enough to secure one, you should be starting it possibly in the next few weeks. I know some kind of tail off towards the back end of the summer, but it'll be certainly in the forefront of your minds. And for this kind of over the next half an hour, me and Julia are going to kind of just talk about some of the kind of practical advice that kind of just to make a good impression on the firm and ultimately not make a bad impression on the firm. I think the title of this podcast is kind of how to stand out on a summer vac scheme for all the right reasons rather than the wrong reasons. Because essentially it is a bit of a job interview, really, because a lot of the summer vac schemes now they do end in an interview for a training contract, and firms will be keeping a close eye on how you perform over those 2 or some are actually 4 weeks now, I think, some summer vac schemes. So really you have to be on top of your game. And obviously Julia can reflect, she has recently just completed a vac scheme, so that'll be fresh in her mind. So she'll be able to give some advice and obviously lean on kind of her experiences over those couple of weeks. So really, yeah, we're just going to dive straight into it actually. And it sounds like an obvious point, but one of my top tips is planning your route to the office. Because it might seem quite simple and actually potentially overlooked by candidates. They might not give it much thought and just think on the day, right, how do I get to firm X's office? Now, many of you tuned in will actually be taking a vac scheme in a potentially in a city that you don't actually live. If we use London for an example, you may be traveling to London and staying in London, potentially for the first time. So it's worth just having a real close look at where the firm's office is located. Now, the best place is to look at the address on the firm's website. Might seem another obvious tip, but firms do change office locations from time to time. There's actually quite a few major firms that are either in the process of changing office locations or have recently just changed office locations. So make sure you're looking at the correct office address for that particular firm. And you probably can't go too far wrong if you're actually using the firm's website. If you're lucky enough to kind of live in close proximity to where the firm's office is, I would recommend doing a bit of a dummy run. Just get an idea of where it is, do the commute, get on the tube, whatever it might take, actually go visit it, see physically where it is, and kind of give yourself a rough idea of how long it took you. Um, an app, when I was in London, an app I relied quite heavily on was City Mapper. Really good app, gives you lots of options in terms of uh, commuting options, whether you want to kind of spend a bit more time on your commute and walk, whether you want to avoid the bus, whether you want to avoid the tube. So that's just a really top tip because a lot of students, the last thing you want to do is arrive late, which sort of feeds into kind of the next one about kind of, punctuality, which is my second tip, just turning up on time. Obviously you don't want a black mark next to your name if you're turning up to the your first day in the vac scheme half an hour late, and your excuse is, oh, sorry, the tube was absolutely packed, or there was delays on the Northern Line. Give yourself bags of time. If you need to be at firm X's office by 9 a.m., if it was me personally, I would be arriving at 8 a.m. and just sitting around the corner, find a coffee shop, just relax, try and compose yourself, because obviously you'll naturally be a little bit nervous for your first day and what to expect. Give yourself plenty of time. If you're commuting your timings and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to arrive at the firm's office with kind of 10 minutes to spare, it's probably going to end in tears if anyone's commuted around London or any kind of major city hub in the last 12 months. You'll know that rarely do trains and tubes and buses run on time. So please give yourself more time than you think you need. And if possible, do a dummy run because, like I say, throughout this 2 week or 3 week process, it's cutthroat, and graduate recruiters and whoever are the lawyers that are involved in the recruitment process at that firm, they're looking for excuses not to take you on because you will all academically be absolutely fantastic. You've obviously got through the kind of the written application, so you can obviously demonstrate your passion for the law and why you want to work for firm X. So really, this is them trying to whittle down the numbers and just don't give them any excuse to do it, particularly something that's easily in your control, like turning up on time and knowing where the firm's office is. So those are kind of my first two kind of top tips of advice. My third one is a little bit more kind of nuanced in that it's law firm dress code. Now, dress code can be a bit of a tricky subject because you can go on other forums like Reddit, particularly. It's stuffed full of threads about people asking what they should wear to their VAC scheme. Now, again, some firms, this would work on it. This advice you've got to take with a bit of a kind of a pinch of salt because some firms adopt different dress codes to others. Some might even stipulate what the dress code is for a particular VAC scheme. And obviously, Julia, I'll come to you in a sec on what your experience was on that. But speaking from a male point of view and a female in terms of kind of suits, I would just recommend a dark suit, ideally black shoes. If you're going to err on the side of caution, some firms think a tie is a bit extreme now. If it was me again, I would probably wear a full suit and tie for my first day. And then if everybody's kind of walking around in open top collars and are a little bit more casual, you can always adjust your dress code on the second day. It's very difficult to reverse that on the first day if you decide you're going to turn up in a blue polo shirt and chinos and deck shoes and everybody's in a suit, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. So always kind of go more formal, err on the side of caution and go more formal. You can always adjust it. Obviously, kind of dressing for the weather as well, particularly in city where obviously, as Julia said at the start, we're in the middle of a bit of a heat wave. So sometimes taking a change of shirt, that's always potentially recommended if it's going to be warm. Take antiperspirant if you feel that you're going to perspire on the tube. And factoring the heat into actually your commute as well. If it's a 40-minute walk as opposed to a 10-minute tube journey, I potentially might walk. The tube is notorious for being hot. So again, that's something maybe just to avoid. Controversial subject here, but can you wear brown shoes? They say no brown in town. That's the old school phrase. Maybe that's kind of waning a little bit. Some more kind of conservative firms might expect you just to wear black shoes. Brown might raise a few eyebrows among some partners. Really, again, just err on the side of caution. If you're unsure how a particular item of your clothing might go down, probably don't wear it. Again, it goes the same again for men in ties. Maybe avoid the one that you got from Disneyland with Mickey Mouse on it. Again, just keep it pretty conservative when it comes to a tie if you were going to wear one. And then finally, just again with novelty stuff, I made a note here: socks as well. Maybe avoid the bright pink socks on your first day of the VAC scheme as well. And also just worth checking, some firms, particularly the elite US firms, will have some sort of sponsorship available. If you don't have anything that you think is suitable business attire, some firms will provide you with an allowance to go out and buy something in advance of your VAC scheme. So it's actually worth just checking what is available as part of the package on your VAC scheme. And also some obviously, some are means tested, some are standard for all future VAC schemers. So it's definitely worth checking what is actually available. And if you're unsure, I'm sure most firms, graduate recruiters are very accommodating. You could just drop them an email and say, look, I'm just unsure what the situation is here. Do you mind clarifying? And give them time to respond. Don't chase after 4 or 5 hours. They're very, very busy people. So don't be bombarding them with emails. But Julia, on the dress code situation, how did you go about it? Did you know what the dress code would be? Were you told? Did you err on the side of caution? What was your approach?
Yeah, so we were told beforehand, this is a US firm, that it was business formal. So they were quite explicit. And for me personally, I'm definitely a just go more formal on the first few days and suss out what everyone else is wearing. So I had a black suit with a sort of just top underneath it, black shoes, black loafers, and then I had a blue suit as well. And I because it was quite warm, I rotated the tops with the different trousers. It was very boring, but I think keeping it boring is definitely the way to go. We were all a bit overdressed, the vac schemers, and I think they know that that's exactly how you're going to turn up because you're a bit nervous and you want to make a good impression. Most of the men wore ties. One of the women wore ties as well. And if the women weren't wearing like trousers and tops, they were wearing like formal, business formal dresses in like quite thick fabrics. I
Mhm.
think if you want to wear a dress as you need to sort of make sure it's got like structure to it. Don't wear something loose or flowy in a way because that usually connotes informality. But yeah, dark colors, clean lines, boring. Just be boring. You're not there to be known for like your fashion sense just yet. You can always experiment a little bit if you get the return offer. I know that some of the people on my team, like in my view, dressed quite casually, but that's not your place yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. It reminds me of an anecdote once where I was at I won't mention the law firm, but an office of a very, very big law firm. That's how I'll probably describe it. And the senior partner came in jeans, a polo shirt, and like loads of bangles and stuff. And I think he's earned that level to dress like that. If you're a back schemer and it's day one and you're turning up looking like that you've just come off a week at Glastonbury,
Yeah.
it probably won't go down well. And it's a mark of respect to that firm if you're dressing kind of smartly. It shows that you're taking this very seriously.
And also, speaking of partners saying funny things, I think for everyone, just making sure you're well groomed. So like having your hair brushed, making sure you're not necessarily clean shaven, but like you've lined your beard up if you've got a beard. There was a partner that came in and saw someone going to their final interview, and he said to this guy, "Are you going to your final interview like that?" Because he looked a bit scruffy or something. So, you might, from some of the slightly more traditional types, you might get a few raised eyebrows if you haven't cleaned yourself up properly. And yeah, it's the same principle.
Yeah, absolutely. So some great advice there. So, how to dress, planning your journey, turning up in time. Now this is a slightly more, again, more nuanced one, but it's attitude and proactivity. Now, attitude is this is advice that shouldn't probably be said. If you've kind of jumped these hurdles to get to the point of a vac scheme, you should have a positive attitude. You should want to secure a training contract at the firm, but it's more just kind of how you're interacting with um, the other vac schemers and the lawyers that are ultimately there to assess you. So it's about kind of being proactive. Now, again, this kind of depends on the structure of the VAC scheme. I know, having spoken to people, that some VAC schemes are incredibly structured. You're given at 1 p.m. you're given this task. At 3 p.m. you're going to this place, and your whole week or 2 weeks are completely mapped out. Others are a little bit more fluid in that you'll be shadowing potentially a partner and you don't really know what's coming down the track. And if it's kind of the latter of those two, my advice is kind of just being a bit more proactive, asking the partner or the lawyer that you're working with, seeking out tasks. Is there anything I can help with? But this is kind of a subtle balance. You don't really want to be, if the partner's looking quite stressed and busy, there's a time and a place. So it's kind of just balancing that and kind of just judging the room and working out, is this a good opportunity to kind of have a conversation with a partner and ask for some potential feedback on a task he gave you earlier in the day. So that this is kind of quite subtle advice, but I imagine the vast majority of VAC schemes are now pretty structured in that you're given tasks. Would that be safe to say that was your experience, Julia?
Yeah, so I'll get onto it in a second, but the time that we had was really, really structured. It was split between mandatory sessions, that were introductions to practice areas or like networking lunches. And then we also had a number of assessments, which were we were told about them well in advance, so we knew they were coming up. And so there wasn't actually much time where you were, I guess, sitting around at your desk waiting for work. But in the moments in those kinds of moments, I made a conscious effort to not badger my supervisor, but ask him, please give me something. I am willing to help. We went on a floor walk when I first started on my first day where he introduced me. And I basically said to any of the associates, if you've got anything that you think I can handle, please send it my way. And I did actually end up getting work from someone who wasn't my supervisor and who didn't even work in the same department as me because she was just sitting on the same floor. She was in the employment team and I was in disputes. And so I ended up doing some work for her. And although it wasn't particularly, I don't know if I did an amazing job at it, it essentially just demonstrates that you're willing to learn and you've got a good attitude and you're able to, go and originate your own work rather than just waiting for things to be handed to you. But yeah, even in those small moments, despite the structured nature of the scheme, you still found time to try and, make your own work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the attitude point and being proactive, this sort of ties into kind of another bit of advice, and it's kind of just around politeness and small talk, which we'll come to. And I mean, again, being polite shouldn't be advice that we should be having to discuss, but sometimes it can be overlooked in the sense that you're very stressed. You might not be kind of yourself on a particular morning. You've come flustered, for example, because you've ignored our advice about planning your journey and turning up on time. Obviously, but being polite to everybody at that firm, from the moment you walk through the door, because you don't know who technically you might be speaking to. Obviously, you might be given a name badge as a vac schemer, but the senior partner or whoever it might be might not be wearing name badges. So you've got to be very careful who you're speaking to. And there's this anecdote that's been doing the rounds for years now about a number of prominent global law firms actually using um, the firm's receptionists to judge vac schemers and how they conduct themselves. Were they polite? Did they say thanks, please when they came to the reception? If they were escorted to the reception, what were they talking about? What was their small talk like? Obviously, that's a point that I'll come to in a second. So it's just about being kind of really kind of on the top of your game, remembering your P's and Q's, because obviously one false move on that situation, and if someone takes your behavior as being rude, whether deliberately or not, that could really scupper your chances of securing a training contract. Hopefully, Julie, I don't need to ask, but I presume you were impeccably polite throughout your VAC scheme.
Well, I converted, so hopefully my
Well, there
my
you go.
personality made a good impression. But yeah, I think small talk, I guess I have quite a bit to add on that because it's a really fun, there's a balance to strike with small talk because obviously you're only there for 2 weeks. There's only so much, or a month maybe, but that's still not a very long time. There's only so much you as a vac schemer can know slash talk about. You can't really ask a partner how their kids are doing if they have kids because you might not know, for instance. So when you're thrust into these like networking lunches or dinners with very senior people, what I saw a lot was very, very intelligent and like interesting people suddenly clamming up and getting very, very nervous because they were talking to such a senior person and they almost didn't talk to them like they were a human being, if that makes sense. They let the seniority override their ability to just chat. And we had that at a networking lunch. One of the vac schemers got really into, I'm going to call it talking shop, with a very senior partner at the firm. And I could tell from the way that they were sort of speaking to each other that he was sort of hoping she would just ask him about like anything else, like the weather,
Hmm.
any book that he had read, something a little bit more casual. Because even if you're there to learn as much as possible about the firm, there's a time and place for asking every single partner that you meet about the most recent deal that they've been in and what do they think about market forces. Sometimes you're sitting at a dinner and you can talk about the food. You're like, oh, this is lovely. I love this wine.
Mm.
I've never had this before, or something like that. So I guess my advice is to not let seniority stop you from just behaving like yourself, being pleasant, being interesting. And yeah, absolutely on the politeness front, anyone could be listening. I've heard firms using like taxi drivers that they order for you um, as spies, I suppose. And oh my God, I was so paranoid about that because I'd heard about it and they gave us a taxi to take us to our final dinner. So I was staring at this poor taxi driver thinking, he's listening to everything that we say. And we were in the middle of, I don't know what we were talking about, but I was just thinking, is this appropriate for him to hear? But I was being paranoid. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, it's interesting because and I'm sort of guessing here, but kind of these social situations that firms put you in these vac schemes, whether it's mini golf, which seems to be a very popular one, or making pizzas seemed to was a period of a trend with law firms, or kind of more slightly more formal sit down meals at usually very fancy restaurants. The lawyers that will or partners that come along, they're trying to just assess you out of a workplace environment. They're trying to say, look, could we get on with this person? Is this person weird?
yeah,
Would we feel comfortable putting this person in front of one of our clients and talk about stuff that might not necessarily pertain directly to that client's particular matter or problem? Because
exactly.
sometimes, yes, the client will want to talk about his problem, but it's about forging those kind of relationships that will last for years and years with that firm, which potentially is very lucrative. So in terms of the small talk point, just the things that I quickly jotted down is probably avoiding anything that's can be deemed politically charged. Just don't go there. You don't know the politics of the particular person you're speaking to, and they might not agree with yours. So it's best probably just not to bring it up. Is it workplace appropriate? I think again, Julie, mentioning kind of family and kids. If you've stalked the partner on LinkedIn and
Yeah.
have seen that they were, I don't know, in Mallorca for 2 weeks with their wife and kids, probably don't bring it up because it just makes you look a bit weird. So it's just kind of just judging it. And again, a bit like the dress code, anything you're unsure about, just err on the side of caution and probably don't bring it up. I think that would probably be my advice. And sort of what ties into these kind of events is a lot of them alcohol will be present. Now, over the last few years, I have seen a notable shift in firms on their VAC schemes doing stuff that no longer centers around alcohol, or there's lots of options for non-alcoholic, soft drinks and stuff, and there's alcohol also available if people want it. But it still remains a part of it, and we still do hear occasional stories of VAC schemers where they've decided a partner meal is the time that they want to get blind drunk, and it's just like, and it kind of may stem to stress and panic, and who knows what the motivations are behind it. My advice would be that if you're going to drink alcohol, do it very moderately. Just have, if it's a 3 hour meal, have a glass of wine or one beer. If you're kind of finding and that you're ordering 3 or 4 glasses of wine, I think you're slipping into trouble there. You just don't need to do it. You're not at university, you're not at the student union. It's a sit down meal. As we said at the start of this podcast, it is a 2 week job interview, and you wouldn't drink normally halfway through a job interview. So don't do it necessarily on a vac scheme. So yeah, just if you're going to consume alcohol, very, very minor, drop it right down and just have a glass. Hopefully there was no kind of incidents on your vac scheme, Julia, with alcohol consumption.
No, God, no, I don't think so. So we had three major socials. One of them was just drinks at the pub with future trainees. That was fine because there were no senior people there. That was actually really lovely, and people were very nice. I think some of the trainees got drunker than us. Let them get drunk, don't do it yourself.
Yeah.
Then we had a cookery school where we were deboning fish and like making food, and you had a glass of wine alongside it if you wanted one, but it wasn't excessive. I
Hmm.
think the most stressful one was the final partner dinner, where I had the joy of being sat next to an extremely senior member of the firm who is lovely, and I very much enjoyed speaking to him. But it was a 5 hour long dinner where people were refilling your glass of wine as they went round the table constantly. So if you wanted to take it easy, you had to say no, thank you. So don't be afraid to say no, thank you, because it's completely fine. No one's going to judge you for it. But I noticed that every time someone took a sip and even like half emptied their glass, they were just because they were being generous. But
Yeah.
yeah, it could, you know, go into dangerous territory, especially if the dinner was 5 hours long. I really had to pull out my small talk and big talk, actually. We ended up speaking about linguistics, but I think on your previous point, it's a perfect example of the fact that I don't think we talked about law
Mm.
really more than 80% of the time. Everything else was what kind of books he liked, what kind of books I liked, our opinion on the food, the fact that he used to be friends with Amal Clooney, normal things.
Yeah, normal things. We're all friends with Amal Clooney.
Exactly.
So yeah, so I kind of well, actually, I've got one more point before I hand over to you, Julia. It's adding people on LinkedIn.
Mm,
Now, fellow vac schemers, I think it's fair game. If you want to add them, that's entirely your prerogative. Where it gets a slightly more tricky is adding the lawyers and partners that you meet along your 2 weeks. I think my approach would be, as a general rule of thumb, is just ask them, do you mind if I connect with you on LinkedIn? Because oh, it was really interesting you were talking about X. Do you mind if I connect and drop me a message if I've got any questions? Something like that. I think that perfectly sets up, and I doubt you're going to get somebody turning around and saying, no, do not add me on LinkedIn. What I think is slightly strange is if you've either not asked and you've had like a brief interaction with that person and then you decide you're going to add them on LinkedIn without any kind of connecting notes, because you can obviously say something which provides a bit of context to why you're adding that person. I think that would be a little bit strange. I do get lots of people that add me on LinkedIn that I've never even met, and there's no kind of introductory note, and I'm just like, I have literally no idea who you are or why you would want to add me. So I think it's just trying forging that slight relationship before then you add that person. But then at the same time, there's probably an overkill where you don't add every partner and lawyer that you've met, because you'll meet quite a few over the course of the 2 weeks. So I would kind of less is more would be my approach. If I was lucky enough to secure a vac scheme, I think the approach is you get like a supervising partner. Julia will probably explain a little bit more about that, or a supervising lawyer. I would probably just ask if to add them towards the end of the vac scheme, because you've obviously been working closely with them for a couple of weeks. You've forged a pretty good relationship with that person, touch wood, and I think that would be completely appropriate. If you're adding everybody that you meet from the receptionist through to the senior partner who you saw from across a room, I think that's a bit strange and probably a bit over the
yeah.
top. Did you add anyone on LinkedIn?
I think for me, the rule of thumb is don't add anyone beforehand. I had a crisis moment when I was staring at like the assigned supervisor that I had been given and the trainee buddy that I'd been given as well, and thinking, should I add them beforehand? And I decided not to. My rule of thumb is if you've met them on the scheme and had a proper conversation with them, it's generally acceptable to add them after, not
Mm,
during. You shouldn't be faffing around on LinkedIn on your phone during the scheme. You should be busy actually speaking to people. And yeah, I think the only people I added were the supervisor, who was really lovely, and he actually reached out to me afterwards on LinkedIn to congratulate me
mhm.
for getting the TC because he didn't want to email my personal email, I think. And then the partner in my team. Anyone else, it's just sort of been they've either added me. I think LinkedIn's a bit, yeah, if you I also get loads and loads of people adding me, probably because of legal cheek for who I don't know, and it's appreciated, but I just if I don't know you, then yeah. So I
Yeah,
think just err on the side of caution and don't add everyone.
yeah,
No need for
good,
that.
really good advice. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So, Julia, I thought, given that you're kind of fresh from your experience on a vac scheme, and obviously, as you touched upon, you were offered a training contract off the back of it, so it presumably went very well. You're going to talk a little bit about approaching the work on a vac scheme. How did you go about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it will vary between schemes, but your time will likely be divided between the following things. So actual work, i.e., the work that your department gives you or your supervisor gives you, networking, which can be broadly split into socials, networking sessions that are, calls as such, and coffee chats, any mandatory sessions or training, and any assessments, because lots of schemes do assessments now, which form part of the recruitment process. When it comes to the actual work itself, you'll likely be sat with someone, and you'll likely be sat in a team. If you know the team beforehand, familiarize yourself with a few key concepts, i.e., if you're doing a corporate seat, make sure you know what an SPA is. Obviously, there's only so much you can do, and I would caution against over revising because you simply won't be able to fit everything in. But just make sure you kind of know what the seat does at the very least. Like if you're sitting in a private equity seat, what is private equity? I mean, given that you've got this far, you can likely answer that question. But when it actually comes to doing the work, let's say your supervisor's given you something, it's more about how you approach it rather than what you actually do. Because you are a vac schemer, you might not have done law before, you might only be in your second year of your LLB, so you won't probably do anything massively substantive. However, make sure that you ask the right questions, make sure that you approach it in a way that's curious and structured. For instance, that piece of employment law work that I got, that was a pro bono case. I had to read through these letters and basically identify any sort of inconsistencies, which included things like typos and any ways, to quote the lawyer, to make it more punchy because they were trying to get something for the client to not give away too much. I'm not going to add much value. I spotted a few typos, which was great, attention to detail. And I made like one recommendation, but I think what made me perhaps not look impressive, but look like someone competent was that when the lawyer, the associate, was explaining the background to the case, I took notes on everything. So why is this happening? What dispute is this person in with their ex-employer? What do they want? I asked follow-up questions. I said, oh, what's this? What does this mean? And they explained it to me. And I think that went over well because when I then went to give her my recommendations, I proactively went over to her office once I had finished it. I was able to link it back to the context of the case. I didn't just do something for the sake of doing it. I tried to understand why I was doing it. And also I asked, what format do you want me to make this in? Do I do track changes? When do you want it by? So practical things. The most difficult thing I did was this huge sort of bit of work that I did for a deposition that our team was helping out the US team on. And essentially, I got this massive file of emails. They were like 15 emails. They all had really long chains. And this was all just correspondence between opposing counsel, our client, and it was related to a very, very niche area of law called the Hague Convention, which is about like getting evidence for foreign court proceedings. I won't go into detail, but essentially my job was to update the internal guidance note for the firm with everything that they had learned so they wouldn't have to go back through these emails if they got a similar question in the future on a similar case. Very overwhelming. My supervisor later apologized to me and said, I don't think I explained it well enough because he quite literally threw me in the deep end. It was also the first time I used resources like Practical Law. So what I did was I tried to structure things very, very carefully. I asked him about like drafting styles that he would prefer. I made sure to note down any questions I had throughout the process. If I was unsure about something, I would give it a go and then clarify when we were going through it together. I said, I wasn't sure about this, but I thought this would be a good idea. What do you think? I always came to him with a solution. And I think that's really important. So even if it's something that you're completely unfamiliar with, I don't know how to legally draft. I think that's pretty clear. Then you just need to make sure that you are treating it like a learning opportunity, but not just as a student, but as someone who is, able to use their own mind and come up with ideas rather than just coasting along. Yeah. On the point of like proactivity that you mentioned earlier, I think it's fine to ask around the office for work. You're likely not going to get very, very much. But for instance, one of the big partners in the team wasn't there when I first did the floor walk. So I psyched myself up and went to introduce myself to him on the second day. And I was quite scared of him. But I just said, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Julia. I'm a vac schemer. I'd be happy to take any work if you have any. He said, oh yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. Never gave me anything, but it's just worth it. For the man, I'll like touch on these briefly. For the mandatory sessions, just make sure you come to them with questions. We had like intro to X practice area. Grad rec will always usually be sitting in the room with you, so they're looking for people who engage actively and don't just ask questions that you could find out from the website. Um, so either make sure you can think on your feet or prepare. Don't try and sound overly clever by like quoting certain laws or like saying, I don't know, I read this in the FT. What do you think of this really niche development if this person isn't even related to that? It isn't, their work isn't even related to that area of law. Just be genuinely curious and thoughtful and use the sessions like as actively and as wisely as you can because they're your best opportunity for finding out about practice areas that you might not be sat in. So, for instance, I learned a lot about competition law, which was really, really interesting. Coffee chats. So I think I'm going to spend some time on this because it's a controversial topic. So this is essentially where you are given the opportunity to contact any lawyer in the firm and say, hi, would love to chat about XYZ, would love to learn a little bit more about your work, etc. And also, it's also another opportunity for you to talk to people outside of your team. Do this because you're encouraged to, but don't go overboard. There was a person on my scheme who I think talked to over a dozen people. And I think he was just genuinely really interested in what they did. Like he wasn't trying to just get ahead. I think he was just curious. But this takes away from the time that you have to prepare for the assessments that you might have to do actual work for your supervisor. And that's the stuff that matters. Coffee chats are not assessed. Coffee chats are for you to learn more about other people rather than the other way around. Um, for like organizing them, the rule of thumb is that if you're given like a Teams account or like a messaging account for the firm, use that for trainees and associates. Say hi, XYZ, morning, would you be free, etc. Blah blah blah, and then use the email alongside their secretary for partners and counsels. Partners and counsels are very very busy. It's worth figuring out who their secretary is because they'll be able to organize everything for you, and that's usually listed on the firm's directory, which you'll have access to. It's a good idea. Don't overdo it and always come prepared with some questions as well. Don't just invite this very senior person for a coffee, get them to pay for your coffee and then ask them. So, I don't know, what was it like working on the most obvious case that this firm has done that you can find out about literally anywhere else? Be proactive. And then finally, the set tasks and assessments. As Tom has mentioned, lots of these VAC schemes will have at the end of them a final interview, and then throughout it, you'll have these assessments that are almost kind of like an assessment center style assessment. I've said assessment a lot. These really need to be prepared for. Different firms will weigh them differently in sort of relation to the work that you do for your supervisor and other things, like the interview. But for us, they were really heavily weighted. They were clearly very, very important. And we were expected to put a lot of effort into preparing for at least one of them because that's when we could. It was quite funny. One of them was a client pitch, and we had it on our timetable that we would have a briefing for it, which I assumed was when we would get told, the details of the deal. And we were quite blindsided because the person who was giving us the details sort of came into the room, introduced themselves very briefly, and started speaking immediately and telling us all of these very, very like precise details about the deal with no PowerPoint slides, no handout, no nothing. So it felt quite it was quite intimidating. We were all just scrambling to write things down, so be ready. I don't know if that was an active intimidation tactic or if they're just used to it. But yeah, use a lot of your time, and supervisors will be quite understanding if it's the case at your firm that you need to put a lot of effort into this because it will likely be assessed in a way that an assessment center would be. Yeah. And for us, I think we had the opportunity to use our coffee chats kind of like, I wouldn't say a fishing exercise, but sort of like a research exercise because you were able to speak to someone from the competition team, tell them about this deal and say, I have a question about a competition point with relation to this deal. Can you help me? And they say, yes, but you actually actively have to look for those. But yeah, that's sort of the work side of things. Be proactive, be curious, demonstrate how you're thinking, be organized, be clear, and yeah, be prepared for those big set assessments. And also for mandatory sessions, make sure you turn up on time. I was in a different building to the main office, so I had to walk over for 5 minutes and then go up the lifts. So I always made sure that I was early. But I think now we have some big no-nos that just don't do it. Absolutely not. I'll start off with some. I don't know if you have any, Tom. Um, if your firm has told you what your end time is, stick to it. I.e., if your hours are 9:30 to 5:30, there is absolutely no reason for you to be there at 9 p.m. Do not stay late at the office. You are not doing billable work. The clients are not hounding you for work. It's not going to impress, especially if you've been told not to. And in the worst case, it will have HR implications. Don't do that. Another do not. Don't be rude to other back schemers, slash don't talk over them, slash don't steal their work. Just make sure that you're respectful and fair, especially when you're doing group assessments. There is nothing worse than feeling like you've put a lot of effort into something and then someone talks over you and you're not able to share your point. That is stressful. I think from a professional standpoint, not just like how you relate to each other personally when you're, I don't know, having lunch. A big one that I think is, I've touched on it already, is just don't try and impress people for the sake of impressing them. People, because of nerves, try and make a habit of like overcompensating, trying to sound really clever, like they know everything. And it will at best make people feel quite awkward because they can feel you trying in that way, or it will backfire because the person you're talking to will know quite a lot about what you're talking about and just push you on it in like a casual situation. It just, yeah, just be yourself. There's absolutely no need to try and pretend like you eat the FT for breakfast. Like you don't probably, and if you do, that's impressive. But on the drinking point, just don't drink too much. We've already touched on that. The graduate recruitment team at my firm told us some horror stories that I won't divulge, but certainly, yeah, some of the people that really messed up did not get return offers in the past because they just did something really stupid. And then a final tip, even if you feel like you're sort of off the clock at these social activities, you are still being observed if even if you're not being assessed. Don't give people a reason not to hire you. There was someone at the cookery school that we did. So you go into this underground cookery school and you debone a fish, that's what we did, or you portion up a chicken, or you do other things if you're vegetarian. There was someone at the cookery school who used a knife in a really silly way. He like pointed it towards himself when he was chopping up the chicken, and he just clearly wasn't really thinking, and he wasn't able to, follow instructions, and he was, getting distracted and not doing what the instructors told them to. And the partner who was doing the activity with him said to me afterwards, this was a few years ago, God, yeah, like he was very intelligent, but I just sort of thought to myself, you look like you're about to stab yourself, and this is really dangerous, and you're not following instructions. Do I want someone like that in front of a client? I don't think so. So, you're not going to be assessed on your ability to cook, but you're going to be assessed on, I suppose, your ability to just have common sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely that. Well, I mean, we've covered lots there. We hope that you've taken at least something from that. Hopefully, you know a lot of that already if you're tuned in listening. You hopefully you've got to the point where you're about to start a summer vac scheme. So you're obviously clearly well, you might not be able to debone a chicken, but you could always learn that on a vac scheme apparently. But yeah, so thanks very much for tuning in. If you have got a summer vac scheme lined up, we wish you all the best. If it doesn't result in a training contract offer, don't worry too much. You've done the first hurdle in getting invited into the firm, so hopefully there'll be more coming down the track. Do stay positive, but hopefully you can follow our advice there and hopefully turn that back scheme into a training contract offer. But thanks very much for joining me, Julia. And we'll see you who are tuned in now at a new Legal Cheat podcast, hopefully next week. Thanks very much.
Bye bye.